To start first, I was hoping we could kind of just take, and we were kind of talking about it already, but just walk me through briefly when you look at, what you're hoping to accomplish in your time here in this office. What really sticks out to you as those big tenets that you're hoping to really get after?
Well, we kicked that off on day one. So on our first day in office, we announced that we are hiring 2 more prosecutors to build our team. Our focus on building a relationship with law enforcement, helping crime victims, enforcing our laws through criminal prosecution and protecting public safety. We also announced that I will be joining and have joined basically lawsuits to hold the Biden administration accountable, whether it's the unconstitutional COVID mandates, the student loan cancellation that violates the law, or other laws where Biden has gone too far. And then we announced a bottom-up, top-down audit of all victim services, and one of the things that I'm doing this month is traveling around Iowa, listening to people who provide victim services so we can work on doing a better job.
And one of those pieces of legislation we kind of wanted to focus in on is looking at penalties for selling controlled substances. And, just kind of, I know there's that focus from Governor Reynolds as well on penalties for fentanyl. So talk to me about, what you're hoping that legislation and maybe some other pieces might accomplish for the state.
Well, as a prosecutor, I understand the toll that illegal drugs take on Iowa, and the deaths that have occurred because of opioid overdoses and other overdoses are devastating. I'm so glad that Governor Reynolds has been working on this issue, and I want to partner with her and work with her. I have proposed that we increase the penalties on drug dealers who provide illegal drugs to people who then overdose and die. That is a tragedy, and our law, as it currently stands in Iowa, is not enough to address that at this time. It needs to be changed. It needs to be a B felony, which is 25 years.
And talk to me about maybe when you talk to the families who've gone through a loss like that. I mean, to see what's on the books now for when it comes to penalties. I mean, what are they saying about this, or maybe what are prosecutors saying as far as the limits that they have currently?
Yes, well, prosecutors always want to have the tools to achieve justice and to help victims. That's what I'm hearing, and that's what I care about. But the number one thing that comes to mind is just that there is no safe illegal drug. One dose can kill someone. Even if someone has used opioids several times, one dose can be an overdose and can kill them, and that's a tragedy. We have to stop it.
And do you anticipate, this being kind of the first step, do you anticipate more legislation or maybe more avenues, to maybe go over just the controlled substance, issues holistically? I mean, what would you ideally like to see, in your years here in office?
Well, the devastation that illegal drugs are causing throughout Iowa, what that means is there's not just one thing that we can do to solve it. We have to partner with our law enforcement, who are on the front lines. We have to work to make sure people have the services they need when they're ready to get help and deal with their addiction. And we have to hold drug dealers accountable. We also have to secure the southern border, which is where many of these illegal opioids are coming across the southern border in a pure form, coming to Iowa and killing Iowans.
And I've also spoken very passionately about victim assistance. Talk to me about, for people who don't understand, really what that is and what you're hoping to reform.
Yes, well, getting to serve victims was one of my favorite and most rewarding parts of my job as a prosecutor. And I understand that no one chooses to be a victim of a crime. It can happen to anyone. And when that happens, we need to be there with the services that victim needs, whether it's financial help, helping them recover from the crime, counseling, all of the services that someone might need.
And I know in kind of talking to, advocates within, let's say like the domestic violence community, that talk about those services, are maybe scattered across, a city or, are difficult for the survivor to navigate. I mean, is that kind of some of the focus that your office will take of just kind of streamlining or removing those silos to get those services kind of in a one-stop shop?
Well, one thing that I know is when someone is going through the aftermath of being a victim of a crime, that's the toughest time for them to access services and to know what's out there. And that's why we've been holding listening sessions around the state, throughout Iowa, so that we can hear what the challenges are in each area, because each part of the state is different, but every part of the state, rural or urban, needs to be able to serve victims and meet their needs.
And what's the risk, for those communities and maybe for the state as a whole, if that's an area that we don't focus on and we don't, provide those services to victims? I mean, what do we set those families and those Iowans up for, if we don't come in and serve them when, as you said, they need it most?
Yeah. Well, the way I see it as a prosecutor, the criminal justice system is organized around enforcing the law, but also protecting the defendant's rights. We, though, need to go in there and make sure that we are looking out for victims as well. I think that's part of my duty as Attorney General. That's one of the things that motivated me to run in the first place, is knowing what we can do to help victims and what we can do to work with law enforcement. I think that's so important. And then also just making sure that law enforcement has the tools they need to help. They are often the first people that respond when something has happened and there's a crime victim. They're heroes with a good heart, and they do a lot to help victims around Iowa.
And you mentioned the lawsuits, with the federal government, specifically the, Biden administration, and kind of what we've, seen for some of their policies. I mean, talk to me a little bit more about that, kind of what you're hoping, those pieces and those lawsuits, do for Iowa, maybe the stance that they take for Iowans, and kind of, what you're hoping that really spells for the state.
Yeah. Well, it's my job as Attorney General to stand up for Iowa and join or file a lawsuit when the Biden administration goes too far with unconstitutional or illegal overreach. And what that will do for Iowans is it will hold the federal government in check and require them to follow our laws and Constitution.
And I think I saw just this week there was, a draft of a new type of, if the Biden administration or any administration were to put an executive order, that it would give your office kind of the ability to take a look on that and how it would, fit into the state's legislative, priorities. Is that, similar to what the lawsuits that you've launched? Or talk to me about what your role could look like with some piece of legislation like that.
Well, I really appreciate that the legislature also cares about enforcing our laws and Constitution, and that's exactly what this is all about, holding the Biden administration accountable when they go too far, so that the federal government follows our Constitution just like everybody else has to.
And I know, too, I did mention this before, but this week we found out about, the officers involved in the officer-involved shooting with the 16-year-old, were cleared of charges. I was just hoping that you could talk to me just more specifically kind of on the Graham versus Connor, of just kind of the lens that for any agency when they take a look, back at an incident like this, kind of what lens they're looking at, to evaluate something like this.
Well, my office, as Attorney General, we have responsibility to review all officer-involved shootings that result in death in this state, and we take that responsibility seriously. We issued a report after the investigation that describes everything that went on and what our conclusions are, but we found that it was justified given the facts of the situation. During the time period, the individual was armed with a weapon the entire time and did not put it down despite being requested to do so over 70 times by the responding law enforcement. And I just have to say, our law enforcement, they put themselves in harm's way to keep us safe.
And I guess, for Iowans to understand, what would you want them to know, really, that, the passion that you have for this office and really what they can expect out of you for just the type of Attorney General that they can expect you to be for them?
Yeah. Well, I was born and raised on a farm, so I'm going to bring that farm girl work ethic to the AG's office, and we'll be working in all 99 counties to listen to Iowans, because that's where some of the best ideas come from. And I will keep my focus as a prosecutor on working with our law enforcement, helping crime victims, working with prosecutors, that we're enforcing our laws, and just make sure this office really works for Iowans.